everybody, Nike here, bringing you the video for my updated Thief build guide for PvE and raids. After the spring patch, Thief DPS has been tweaked again significantly. Most importantly, the change to the trait Lead Strikes and Trickery, which makes a Cloak and Dagger DPS rotation viable again. This Thief build is first and foremost a Berserker direct damage build, focusing on personal DPS. Venom Share Thief, I don't believe is viable. I don't believe it will give very good results to the raid team that uses it over a Berserker Thief. So I won't be covering that here. Another interesting aspect of Thief, which this patch has made even more excellent, is that you can achieve optimal DPS results with just the core Thief traits, and you don't need the Daredevil Elite Specialization in order to do so, which I will discuss later. There are not many professions in the game that can use just their core traits and achieve top results, but Thief is one of them, so that puts them in a good place, especially for the free-to-play players out there who are looking to get into dungeons and fractals with this patch. Alright, gear is relatively simple for the Thief. I recommend Berserkers, weapons, armor, and trinkets. These are going to obviously be here to support a full DPS build. For armor, we're going to recommend Rune of the Scholar for max DPS. For weapons, you're going to need, at very, very minimum, a staff and 2 daggers. Additionally, I highly recommend having a pistol and a short bow on swap in your bags so that you can provide maximum utility for your party. For your standard weapons, such as your staff, you're going to go with Sigil of Air and Sigil of Force. These are your normal DPS sigils that will go in every raid comp, and for the most part are great in dungeons and fractals as well. One thing to note on my short bow, I do like to have a Bloodlust sigil on there. You find a lot of times in dungeons that there's tons of little tiny trash mobs that you can kill quite easily with the blasts from your short bow, and build up Bloodlust stacks that will help you later on in the dungeon. Your pistols, it's not particularly relevant what sigil you put on them, because most of the time in PvE, the pistol is going to be used pretty much exclusively as a smoke field in order to stealth your team. Not particularly pertinent in raids, but it does come up quite a bit in dungeons. So that's it for gear. It's relatively simple, and not much has changed for Thief since the dawn of time. We'll move right on to traits. Alright, so for traits, the Staff, Thief, Daredevil will use Deadly Arts, Critical Strikes, and Daredevil. In Deadly Arts, we're going to take Mug, Revealed Training, and Executioner. The question is, why Revealed Training if you don't really have a way to stealth yourself in raids? There are times, especially for Sabbatha and Gorseval, where you will get Revealed Training buff, especially for Gorseval 100% of the time, and for Sabbatha, every time you fly back from destroying a cannon, you can use your Stealth Gliding to give you Revealed Training. It's a tiny little bonus, but it's better than either Panic Strike or Deadly Trapper. And there's also times where you'll steal off of a mob and get the Blinding Powder stolen item bundle, and that will also give you some stealth. So it's not a huge deal, but it is a pretty good one. Critical Strikes, we're going to take Flawless Strike, Practice Tolerance, and No Quarter. Please note, if you don't have a Ranger in your party, and you don't have and as a result you're not going to have Spotter, I would suggest switching Flawless Strikes to Side Strike, which will give you an increased critical chance and put you up to a much higher critical chance when you are flanking your opponent. But generally speaking, if you have Spotter, Flawless Strikes is the way to go. In Daredevil, we're going to take Havoc Master for DPS boost, Staff Master for another DPS boost, and finally Bounding Dodger for another DPS boost, which makes Staff really, really good. So this is the build I recommend for raids. You have good CC with your utility skills, which we'll get into a little bit later. But for raids, I like Staff. Why do I prefer Staff for raids? The DPS rotation is much easier, and I'll get to that when we cover DPS rotations, but suffice it to say, in raids it's much more important to focus on the mechanics and the boss than it is to have to worry about your DPS rotation. Now, for some expert players, they might say, look, I'm a pro, I don't need to worry about that. I don't tunnel vision on my rotation. I can do Cloak and Dagger backstab and worry about my positioning and do all that and not have to and not be a liability to my team. That's great, and you obviously don't need my guide if you're that good. But for most players, I think it would help their team out a lot if they went with a simpler build, even though this build doesn't have lower DPS. It's just as good as the Dagger build in terms of DPS. This build is a lot simpler to use, and therefore in a raid situation, I will take a simpler build over a more complicated one 10 times out of 10. But with that said, I will get into the dungeon version, which I believe, as Dagger is going to be better for that. Alright, so the Dagger variant will use the base Thief specialization Trickery instead of Daredevil. In Trickery, we would take Flanking Strikes, Bountiful Theft, and Quick Pockets. So why do we take this with Dagger over Daredevil? It's because of this trait, Lead Attacks. Just by doing your normal Cloak and Dagger backstab rotation, you're eventually going to build up after a very short amount of time into the fight. Or if you pre-burn some of your initiative before the fight starts, you can start out with a big 15% DPS boost, which is great and really helps put Thief's DPS numbers up there high. This is a much better redo of the trait. I didn't like the way it was before, where you were encouraged to conserve your initiative, which led to Thief playing a really garbage auto attack build. I think it's better to have traits that encourage you to use all your skills and use them in an efficient, intelligent way in order to get better DPS. One cool thing that this does, and I'll talk about it more when I get to the rotations, is Quick Pockets. What Quick Pockets is going to allow you to do is get 3 initiative when you weapon swap in combat. Generally speaking, if you use this in a dungeon, your normal setup is going to be like this, where you're going to have Dagger and Shortbow on swap. However, one cool thing you can do is put your daggers in opposing setups like that. So when you're in combat, you're attacking, and when you get low on initiative, like so, weapon swap, and if you were in combat, it would, boom, fill you back up with initiative. As well as in this build, when you steal, you get more initiative. So between the weapon swap and the steal, you are much more able to keep your initiative up and give you the fuel to Cloak and Dagger much more often. So yeah, that's basically it for the Thief traits, and we'll move right along. So Consumables. I recommend with this build that you use the best in slot food, which would be bowl of seaweed salad to give you 10% while moving. Somewhat cumbersome to keep the buff up, having to strafe back and forth, but if the upside of it is so good that you just kind of have to do it and have to just learn to make it second nature for you. As far as backup cheap foods, if you're more on a budget, you can use plates of truffle steak. They help you out good. If you're not really on a budget and for whatever reason you're just too lazy to use the seaweed salad buff, you can use a bowl of sweet and spicy butternut squash soup, which is also really good. As far as the utility consumable goes, I recommend Toxic Sharpening Stones. They are the best in slot. However, feel free to use whatever the best sharpening stones you can afford to use if you're on a budget. Thief is relatively simple, so these are pretty much universal things that you can use in every dungeon, and every raid, and every fractal. Slot skills. Generally speaking, our standard loadout is going to be Assassin Signet and Signet of Agility. Everything else is variable. I recommend when you're using Daredevil to use Fist Flurry. It's one of the highest DPS skills in the game, and in a Daredevil build, you want to use it on cooldown because it is just that powerful. And for your elite, I like Finishing or Impact Strike because it is a pretty good CC, and that is one thing Thief excels at is CC. Healing skill, this is kind of controversial. I like Signet of Malice. It gives you heals when you attack. You have a very, very high rate of attack, so you heal quite a bit. And there's a lot of times, such as when Gorseval is doing his CC and you're going to take retaliation damage, this counters a good deal of it. Some other players will suggest that Channeled Vigor is a better heal. It's on a very short cooldown, and it's a very big heal. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of Channeled Vigor. You have to kind of stop what you're doing to heal and channel. I would rather just mindlessly auto-attack and let my druid top me off. But that's me. If you're using a base Thief build and not using Daredevil, you can use Basilisk Venom as your elite, which basically functions the same way as Impact Strike. And instead of Fist Flurry, your options are somewhat limited. You can, if your team needs Reflex, bring Smokescreen. If you need some sort of CC, you can bring Needle Trap or Ice Drake Venom. But generally, the default is going to be Infiltrator's Signet, which will just give you extra regen and help fuel those Cloak and Dagger backstabs. That's really it. There's really not too much variation in what you see people bring for raids at this point. For dungeons, of course, you always want to remember that Smokescreen is available as a projectile defense. You want to remember, of course, Shadow Refuge is very, very powerful. And also, that Shadow Step allows you to move very quickly through dungeons if need be. And lastly, you have an on-demand, really powerful CC with Scorpion Wire. So that's it for slot skills. I'm going to discuss DPS rotations next. Alright, so for the staff DPS rotation, you pretty much are just going to auto-attack and use Fist Flurry on cooldown. There's a couple things you have to remember. You never want your endurance bar to be full because you get bonus DPS when your endurance bar is empty. Therefore, every now and then, you're going to want to dodge just to keep it low if you're not dodging for mechanical reasons. Your dodges do damage to the bosses, so it's not a complete loss to dodge. Additionally, you want to dodge before Fist Flurry comes off cooldown, so you get the Bounding Dodger DPS boost, and your Fist Flurry hits extra hard. Personally, what I like to do is burn my 2 dodges early before the fight starts, so I always have 1 dodge in reserve to save my life if need be. But I hover between 2 and 3. That way I never fill up my endurance, but I always have at least 1 dodge in reserve to save my life when needed. One thing to mention is that Vault now does work with quickness. So it was previously a DPS loss to use. Now, it's not that it's not worth using, it's just pretty much going to be worth using towards the end of fights where you are not going to need your initiative for anything else. For the most part, though, the DPS is best when you just stick to auto-attacking and Fist Flurry, which is why I recommend the staff build for raids, just in order to keep that as simple as possible. So for daggers, the optimal dagger rotation is Cloak and Dagger, followed by Backstab, and then an auto-attack rotation. You want to take advantage of quick pockets after your Backstab in order to refill your initiative so you can Cloak and Dagger again immediately when the revealed debuff expires. When your weapon swap is unavailable, you should use Steel to give you some initiative back in place. Using these 2 things will keep your initiative high and allow you to constantly backstab as much as possible, and it will help power your lead strikes, which of course is a big DPS boost. That is basically it for the rotation. Everyone knows the Cloak and Dagger backstab rotation now. They've been playing it for years. I'm going to show a quick video of both rotations in action back to back, and then we will wrap it up. Alright guys, that's it. I hope you enjoyed the updated Thief build guide for raids, dungeons, and fractals. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them. I definitely enjoy playing Thief. I love doing it in dungeons. I like doing it in raids. It's a fun class to play, very rewarding. The combat feels very visceral and smooth. It's much like a warrior in that the attacks feel like they have the proper weight behind them, and it feels like your character's agile. I don't know, I just really enjoy it, the aesthetics of the class and the feel of it in combat. It's good stuff. So I hope you guys also enjoy playing Thief and Daredevil in raids, and I will see you guys next time.